I spent 38 years teaching, giving everything I had to my work and to the one I raised alone. On my last day, I packed up my things with a quiet smile, thinking I was stepping into peace, into mornings where I didn't have to rush, into a home where I'd finally be cared for. But 5 days into retirement, sitting at my daughter's table, she looked at me and said, "I don't feed extra mouths." Just like that. No warning, no kindness. I didn't argue. I just nodded. But in that moment, I knew my rest wasn't a gift here. It was a problem. And without a single raised word, I began to remember exactly who I was. If you're still watching, thank you. I don't take that lightly. Wherever you're listening from, whether it's your kitchen with the quiet hum of a kettle or a room that once held more voices than it does now, I'm glad you're here. And if any part of what I just shared made something inside you pause, I want you to know you're not alone. Have you ever felt like your time had passed in the very place you once made possible? Have you ever outlived your usefulness in a house you helped build, in a life you held together with tired hands and sleepless nights? Because I did. I sat at that table, hearing words that cut deeper than raised voices ever could, and I smiled, not because I was okay, but because I knew silence could carry more than shouting ever would. If you've ever been made to feel like you were too much or not enough after giving everything you had to someone's beginning, I hope you stay with me. This story isn't about anger. It's about remembering who you are when someone else forgets. And if any part of your life has looked like mine, I'd love to know. I'll be reading every word like it's my own. Because the truth is, sometimes the only thing heavier than sacrifice is being forgotten after it. And if you've carried that weight too, then this story is for you. I wasn't handed much in this life, but I held tight to what I had. I raised my daughter on a teacher's salary, stretched thin between chalk dust and grocery bills. There were nights I graded papers with the last light in the house after tucking her into bed with a full stomach and clean clothes, even if it meant skipping dinner myself. I never missed a PTA meeting, never missed a recital, even when I had to borrow shoes from a friend just to look presentable in the front row. Rent was always paid, even if it left pennies in my purse. And every birthday I found a way to make it feel big, even if it was just a single candle in a homemade cake. She never knew how close we came to breaking, and I made sure she didn't. That was my pride. She was a bright girl, sharp, quick with words, never needed much help with homework, and even when she did, she never liked asking. Independent, that's what everyone said. But I saw it differently. She was guarded, careful with her needs. She learned early how to want quietly. Maybe because she saw me working 2 jobs. Maybe because I made it look easier than it was. I used to think her strength came from watching me survive. But lately, I wonder if it made her believe that survival is all I ever wanted. And that love, if it's not giving her something new, must be a debt unpaid. I gave her everything I didn't have growing up. Not just food and clothes, but the safety of knowing she was the center of someone's world. I made her the priority I never was. And maybe that was my mistake. Maybe that's why when I stopped working, she stopped seeing the use in me. She grew up thinking that love should always arrive with interest, that effort should be matched, that care is currency. And when I moved in after retirement, I could feel the shift in the air, not loud but steady. The kind of cold that doesn't need words. I brought my bags into her house, thinking I'd finally breathe easy. But the walls were too quiet. The chairs never quite comfortable. I was in the way and always reminded by what wasn't said. I didn't want to be a burden, I just wanted rest. Just a little peace after carrying so much. But instead, I found myself holding my breath again, wondering if I had to earn every next day just to stay. It was a Friday evening, the kind where the sky turns that soft blue just before it folds into night, and the street outside her house still smelled faintly of fresh rain. I had only just finished unpacking my bags when she called out from the kitchen, saying dinner was ready. I smoothed the front of my blouse, tucked in the hem where it had come loose, and followed the sound of clinking plates and voices. The table was full. Her husband was already seated, talking about some meeting he'd had. The kids were laughing about a TV show. Music played low in the background. It looked warm, full, like something you'd see in a magazine. But when I stood at the edge of that dining room, no one noticed I hadn't sat down. There was no place card for me, no chair pulled out, no plate waiting. I stood for a moment too long before I quietly reached for one from the cupboard and brought it to the end of the table. No one offered to help. No one looked up. The bowl of mashed potatoes had made its rounds but never quite reached me. I didn't want to cause a stir, so I waited until someone passed me the bread, and I smiled to make it look like enough. When my glass stayed empty, I finally asked if there was water, and her son said, "There's some in the fridge, Grandma," without looking away from his screen. So I stood, again, and poured myself a glass. It tasted like something I didn't belong to. After dinner, as dessert came out, store-bought pie still cold from the box, my daughter leaned in, fork in hand, and said it so casually, it almost sounded like kindness. "You'll be working the early shift at the diner down the road. I told them you'd show up Monday. We don't feed extra mouths for free." She didn't even blink. She just took another bite and looked away, as if she hadn't just redrawn the lines of our entire relationship. Her husband chuckled under his breath like it was some kind of joke. The kids kept talking, laughing, carrying on. The room didn't go quiet, it just moved forward, like I hadn't heard it, like I wasn't even there. I sat there with a piece of pie in front of me that I couldn't taste, hands resting in my lap, heart slow and heavy in my chest. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask for clarity. I didn't cry. I just nodded once, as if it all made sense. But something inside me folded, just slightly. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like a visitor in a life I helped build from the ground up. After dinner, she handed me a plastic bag from behind the kitchen door. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear it, and inside was a folded uniform. Black slacks, a white-collared shirt, and a name tag that hadn't yet been written on. There was a faint smell of starch, like something washed but never worn. She said they were expecting me Monday morning at 6, that it would keep me busy, that the walk wasn't far. I looked down at the uniform in my hands, and I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I was too tired to explain the difference between silence and surrender. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I simply walked back to my room, closed the door softly behind me, and laid the uniform across the end of the bed. I spent a long time smoothing out the creases with the side of my hand. The shirt was a little too stiff, the pants a little too wide, but I folded them neatly, like something borrowed and already meant to be returned. That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid on my back, eyes fixed on the ceiling fan as it spun slow, clicking once every few seconds like a tired heartbeat. My bones ached, but not from age, from something deeper. I kept thinking about how easily I had been placed, like furniture, useful only when someone else decided I was. I thought about all the mornings I woke before sunrise to make her lunch, to walk her to the bus stop even in the snow, to sew up the seams of her coat when I couldn't afford to buy another. I remembered staying up nights with a thermometer in one hand and a washcloth in the other, whispering lullabies I made up on the spot just to keep her calm. I remembered working overtime so she could have dance shoes, skipping my own meals so she'd never know what hunger felt like. And still, somehow, I had raised a woman who looked me in the eye and told me I was an extra mouth, as if my presence was a cost, as if rest, after a lifetime of giving, was a luxury she couldn't afford to offer me. I didn't cry. I just laid there, listening to the quiet hum of a house I no longer felt at home in. That was the night I remembered something I hadn't thought of in a long while. I remembered I wasn't expendable. I wasn't someone to be shuffled off to the side. I wasn't a name tag waiting to be filled in by someone else's convenience. I had been everything to her once. And just because she forgot, didn't mean I had to. I woke up before the sun touched the windows, before the coffee pot clicked on, before the hallway ever knew I'd passed through it. I moved slowly, careful not to make a sound, like I was sneaking through someone else's life. The house was still, but not peaceful. It had that particular kind of quiet that hums when something's shifted, when something sacred has been broken, and no one wants to name it. I opened the drawer beside the bed and pulled out the small black note I kept tucked beneath old church bulletins and birthday cards. Inside it was a number I hadn't dialed in years, but one I never forgot. I held the phone for a while before pressing the first number. My hands were steady now. I didn't feel unsure anymore. I just felt ready. When she answered, I didn't cry. I didn't even say hello right away. I just breathed in and said, "You still keep your paperwork neat?" Her voice on the other end was like warm linen. Familiar. Strong. "Neater than my bones these days," she replied, a laugh curling around her words. "What's wrong, Clara?" I didn't say much after that. I didn't need to. She understood. She always had. We met that afternoon. I took a slow walk to her little house near the courthouse, the same one with the white shutters and a porch swing that creaked whenever the wind moved right. We didn't hug. We never needed to. But she poured me tea without asking, the same way she used to when the girls were in school and money was tight and dignity was all we had left to share. I brought a worn manila folder in my purse, thick with papers I had kept tucked away since the day I signed them. She opened them gently, eyes narrowing as she scanned each one. They were all still there, original copies, signatures, dates, and seals. The deed to the house, the one my daughter thought belonged to her, but it never had. I had kept it in my name, not out of distrust, but out of quiet wisdom. I remembered the feeling the day I filed them, that strange whisper in my gut that said, just in case time hardened love, just in case distance grew even within the same walls, just in case rest became a question instead of a given. Mrs. Givens looked up at me, glasses at the tip of her nose. "You're not extra," she said slowly, not out of sympathy but certainty. "You're the foundation." And in that moment I felt something return to me. Not pride, not anger, just clarity. I wasn't going to argue anymore. I wasn't going to plead for space in a home I built with every sacrifice I ever made. I didn't need to explain who I was. I just needed to remind them. And now I had everything I needed to do just that. Quietly. Fully. Without raising my voice. The next morning I woke before anyone else in the house had stirred. The sky was still a deep, sleepy gray, not yet ready to show its light. I sat up slowly, letting my feet find the floor one last time in that room that never quite felt like mine. I looked around and took in the space, the folded uniform still neatly laid out at the edge of the bed, untouched. I picked it up gently, pressed out the wrinkles with the flat of my hand, and placed the apron across the back of the kitchen chair like it had been worn and left behind by someone who'd already finished her shift. No anger in the gesture, just finality. A quiet kind of dignity that doesn't ask permission to exist. I moved through the hallway without turning on a single light. The wood creaked a little beneath my steps as if the house itself knew I was leaving and wanted to say something about it. But I didn't pause. I made my way to the kitchen counter, where I laid down a plain white envelope, sealed, addressed only with her name. Inside it were copies of the deed, a short note written in my own hand, and nothing more. No speech, no apology, no explanation. Just the facts, because sometimes the truth doesn't need dressing up to be heard. Sometimes all it takes is ink and paper and silence. I double-checked the time. The cab was already on its way. I had packed light. Just one suitcase, the same one I used when we visited her college all those years ago when I was so proud I thought my chest would burst. Funny how the same case that once carried celebration now carried my quiet goodbye. I stepped outside, careful to close the door softly behind me. The morning air wrapped around me like a whisper. It wasn't cold, just crisp, as if the day itself was still deciding what it wanted to be. I stood at the edge of the porch, not as someone sneaking away, but as someone stepping forward. The cab pulled up, engine humming low, headlights washing the driveway in a dull yellow glow. I didn't look back. No one saw me leave. No one heard the door close. And that was the point. I didn't slam it. I didn't cry. I didn't shout up the stairs or wait for anyone to wake up and ask why. Because sometimes leaving without a word is the loudest thing you can do. It tells them everything they didn't want to hear. It says, I was here. I mattered. And I'm not waiting around to be reminded of it. I slipped into the back seat, rested my bag on my lap, and watched the house disappear through the window. And as the sun began to rise in the distance, I felt something unspoken settle quietly inside me. Not sadness, not regret, just peace. The kind you pack yourself when no one else thinks you deserve it. She woke up late that morning, probably thinking it would be just another day. No rush in her step, no worry in her chest. The house was quiet, still tucked into that comfortable silence that people take for granted when they believe everything is in its place. I imagine she walked into the kitchen expecting to see me, maybe not with a smile or a plate of eggs, but there all the same. In my chair. In her space. But I wasn't there. The apron still hung on the back of the chair, right where I left it. And beside it, on the counter, the envelope waited. She probably didn't notice it at first. That's how things like that go. They don't look out of place until you're really alone in the room with them. But once she saw her name written in my hand, once she held the weight of that paper and felt how final it was, everything changed. She opened it, expecting maybe a note about where I went, a thank you, a goodbye. But what she found was truth. Plain and steady, in my own words. I'm not a burden. I'm the reason you had a roof over your head, a school uniform that fit, a warm lunch in your bag every single day. I'm not someone who needs to earn my place at a table I built with my own hands. I won't stay where I'm no longer welcome, where rest is treated like debt. The house is no longer yours. The documents are attached. The title has been transferred back. I left the keys with my lawyer. The pages behind the letter were clear and undeniable. Copies of every signature, every file, every record proving what was true all along. That she had been living in something I gave her. And what I gave, I could reclaim. I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it because dignity shouldn't come with terms. I imagine her breath caught in her throat. I imagine the silence in that kitchen suddenly felt a lot heavier. She picked up her phone. She called me, once, twice. No answer. She left a message she didn't know how to finish. Then she called Mrs. Givens, trying to cut through the shock, trying to pull the ground back under her feet. But Mrs. Givens doesn't dance around the truth. She answered, steady as ever, and said exactly what needed to be said. All further communication must go through me. And just like that, the house that was once hers felt different. It didn't matter how many coats she hung in the closet or how many family pictures lined the wall. The foundation had shifted. The name on the papers said so. I wasn't picking a fight. I wasn't slamming doors. I had simply, finally, chosen myself. Quietly, completely, without her permission. The drive to the coast was quiet, just the sound of the tires humming against the road, and the occasional low voice from the radio. I didn't bring much. One suitcase, a leather purse with worn handles, and the envelope of documents that now rested like a stone but felt like a feather. I had no one to impress, no one to explain myself to, and no voice in my head second-guessing what I'd done. I looked out the window as the scenery changed, trees giving way to open sky, the air growing lighter, saltier. It felt like I was slowly stepping back into the part of myself I'd put down for too long. And when the car finally turned into the long, winding drive of the retirement community, lined with flowers I didn't know the names of, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Welcome. The woman at the front desk smiled as she took my name. Not a forced smile. Not the kind people use when they're trying to make you feel like you're not a problem. This was a real smile. One that didn't expect anything from me but my presence. She handed me the room key like it mattered, like it meant something. And when I opened the door to my suite, I paused. There was a small sitting area, a kitchen with a little kettle already set up, and a window that faced the ocean. Real ocean. Blue and endless, with seagulls riding the wind like they owned it. I stood in that room with my suitcase at my feet, and I didn't feel like I had stepped down from anything. I felt like I had stepped up into something I had long been denied. Peace without permission. There was a soft blanket folded at the foot of the bed, like someone knew comfort mattered. The sheets were crisp, clean, white. A small bottle of wine sat on the table with a card beside it that simply said, "Welcome, Clara." I didn't cry. Not right away. I just ran my hand along the windowsill and pulled back the curtain to let the light pour in. And then I sat, right there in the armchair by the glass, with the ocean in full view, and I poured myself a glass. Not to celebrate, not to toast, just to sit. Just to finally be still. I watched the gulls outside dip and climb, fearless and floating, and I thought, this is what it feels like when you're no longer trying to shrink for the comfort of others. She forgot I was the wind that once held her wings. She forgot that when she stumbled, it was my arms that steadied her. That when she dreamed big, it was my hands that stitched the net beneath her. But I haven't forgotten. And I haven't lost that wind. I simply learned how to use it for myself. I'm not angry, I'm not bitter. I'm just finally in a place where love doesn't have to be earned with labor. A place where no one counts how much space I take up. No one sighs when I sit. No one measures my worth against what I can still do. I am not an extra mouth here. I am a person. A whole person. And in this room with no tension, no demands, I am more than a lesson learned too late. I am free. The days that followed were slow and gentle. The kind of quiet that didn't press on my chest. I woke with the sun, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The light came in soft through the tall windows, painting the walls gold. I would sit up in bed and take a breath that belonged entirely to me. No schedules, no noise, no one asking what I planned to do today to prove I still had value. I didn't owe anything to anyone, not anymore. My feet touched the floor not out of duty, but out of choice. I made myself tea each morning and carried it to the balcony, where the ocean sang its same soft song, whether I listened or not. There was a schedule posted on the bulletin board in the lobby, full of small things that filled the days with color. I joined the morning yoga class, not because I needed the stretch, but because it reminded me how good it feels to be inside your own body, without apology. I joined the storytelling circle on Wednesdays. I didn't speak at first. I just listened. Listened to the way others stitched their memories together, how they tucked laughter into sentences that carried old hurt. And when I did finally share a story of my own, it wasn't about her. It was about a time when I was young, when I danced in the kitchen barefoot to a song that skipped on the record player, while she clapped her little hands to the beat. Unaware we didn't have enough for rent that month. That was the memory I chose to keep. Not the ache, not the insult. The joy. The staff started learning my name without looking at my badge. They asked about my favorite foods, what flowers I liked. They noticed when I trimmed my nails or changed my earrings. It wasn't about being doted on. It was about being seen. Fully. Not as a mother, not as a worker, but as someone still unfolding. And in that unfolding, I found pieces of myself that had gone quiet for years. I found the girl who used to dream in full color, who used to write poems in the margins of her workbooks. I started writing again, not for anyone else, just to hear my own thoughts line up in order and feel like mine again. One afternoon, after a walk along the water and a long lunch shared with two women I had only just met, but already trusted, I returned to my room and opened my tablet to check for photos from a neighbor's granddaughter's birthday. Instead, I saw her name in the corner of my inbox. Rachel. The subject line just read, Mom. I opened it slowly, already knowing the weight of what it might carry. I didn't mean it that way. Please call me. Just those words. Nothing more. No apology. No reflection. Just the kind of sentence people write when they're starting to realize something slipped out of their hands, and they don't know how to ask for it back. I read it twice, then once more just to be sure I hadn't missed something. But it was thin, empty in places that should have been full. And I didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, not to punish her, but because forgiveness doesn't live in answering too soon. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it walks away, sometimes it needs to live a little farther from the wound before it can breathe on its own. I sat with it for a while, the screen still lit in my lap, and then I tapped the small button in the corner and deleted it. Not to forget, but to make space for the kind of peace that doesn't beg to be understood. And when the screen went black, I stood up, walked to the window, and smiled at the gulls coasting just above the water. Their wings wide. Their path unburdened. A life was unfolding in front of me, one that no longer required permission. One where the absence of certain voices was not a loss, but a clearing for something better to grow. Something honest, something mine. It was a Thursday afternoon. The kind where the sun stretches just a little longer in the sky, and the breeze smells faintly of salt and something blooming nearby. I had just finished my usual walk around the garden path, stopping here and there to run my fingers along the lavender and listen to the low hum of bees doing their quiet work. I had started wearing my sun hat again, the one I used to keep on the hook by the back door all those years ago. Back when days off were rare and walks like these were stolen instead of given. I passed the common room where a small group was playing cards and another woman was working on a puzzle near the window. I nodded, kept walking, and found myself settling onto the same bench I always did. The one that overlooked the little hill where children sometimes rolled down on weekends. It was peaceful. Still. A kind of silence that didn't feel like absence. It felt like rest. A woman I'd come to know in passing, Ruth, sat beside me with a sigh and pulled a small piece of cake from her tote, offering half without asking if I wanted any. I took it. We sat like that for a while, chewing in rhythm, saying nothing, until she broke the quiet with a story. "You know," she said, wiping crumbs from her lap, "my niece just started working at that little diner down on Pine, the one with the chipped sign and the coffee that tastes like it's been waiting all night to be poured." I smiled. I knew it. Too well. She laughed, then leaned in a little, voice lowering like it was something she shouldn't find so funny. She said when she got hired, the manager kept going on about how they were expecting some older woman, said she was supposed to start weeks ago, never showed, never called, just vanished. Ruth paused, looked at me sideways, and raised an eyebrow. Guess someone had other plans. I took a sip of my water, let the silence hang there just a bit longer, then let out a quiet chuckle. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't smug. It was the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and not needing anyone to clap for it. "I heard," I said gently, "that woman had a bad back and a sharper mind than they expected." Ruth smiled, not pushing for more, just sitting with it the way a good friend does. We didn't need to name anything out loud. We both understood. Life has a way of circling back with its lessons. Sometimes it hums softly under your breath. Sometimes it walks right into the same places you were once sent to shrink in, and pulls out a chair with your name still on it. That diner didn't miss me. They just missed the chance to see someone they could have never measured right. I wasn't meant to serve coffee in silence or wipe down tables to earn my next night under the roof I once paid off in full. I had already done the work. I had already carried the weight. I had already earned my seat. And if they wanted a worker, they should have looked elsewhere. I wasn't a hire. I was history, a story, a whole life that didn't fit on a schedule or a name tag. Later that evening, as the sun slid behind the horizon and the gulls returned to the rocks, I thought about how poetic it all really was. That little diner still waiting for someone who had already chosen a better seat. That apron still hanging on the back of a chair in a house that no longer remembered why it had a kitchen full of warmth in the first place. And me, sitting here with cake on my tongue and peace in my chest, knowing the only thing I ever really needed was this. Room to breathe out, proving I deserved it. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you. Not just for listening, but for staying with me in the quiet. Sometimes that's the part people skip over. The silence. The stillness between the noise. That's where the truth lives. And I think we all carry a little truth that hasn't been spoken aloud in years. Maybe it's tucked behind your ribs or folded in the back of your memory, like a letter you never sent. Maybe you've lived your whole life giving, carrying, showing up without being asked, and still ended up feeling like a placeholder instead of a person. If you've ever been labeled unnecessary by the very people you once carried through storm and sickness, if your name was slowly erased from their memory of how they became who they are, let them. Let them forget. Because you don't need their remembrance to be real. You were there. You mattered. You built more than they'll ever give you credit for. And while they may forget the weight of your hands on their back, the world remembers. Life remembers. And one day, so will they. I used to think I had to earn love by being useful, by making myself small enough to fit into the corners of their comfort. But now, I know better. Love isn't payment for chores done or meals cooked or sacrifices buried under years of silence. It isn't something you barter with loyalty. And rest isn't something you get when everyone else decides you've done enough. Rest is your birthright. It's not a reward. It's not a luxury. It's the natural end to a long, faithful road. And if someone tries to make you feel like you must keep proving your value, even after you've already given them every piece of your youth, walk away. Not out of anger, but out of wisdom. I never thought I'd find peace in a room where no one needed anything from me. But that's where it found me. In a chair facing the sea, with nothing in my hands and no voice behind me asking what's for dinner. I don't live for anyone's approval now. I don't shrink to keep the peace. I expand gently, like the tide. I write letters in my journal with no one to send them to, just to hear my own truth again. And today, maybe this one is for you. Maybe you needed to hear that you're not alone, that you're not selfish for wanting a little quiet, or a room that doesn't ask anything from you. Maybe you've given everything and no one said thank you in years. Well, I will. Thank you. For surviving, for showing up, for still believing in the quiet kind of love, the kind that doesn't need to perform to be real. Fold your hands when you're tired. Close the door without explanation. Sit in the sunlight and let the wind brush against your face without needing to be anywhere else. You've done enough. You've been enough. You still are. And the next time someone tries to make you feel like an extra in your own story, remember, some of us built the stage they're standing on. We don't need their applause. We already know the lines by heart. If they ever made you feel like your season had passed, like your place at the table was temporary, or your value depended on how much you could still give, then this story was meant for you. If you've ever packed your dignity in silence and left a room without slamming the door, just to protect the little piece you had left, then I see you. And I hope you see yourself in these words. Comment below if they ever made you feel like your presence was too much or too late. And if you've ever had to walk away just to finally rest, just to breathe on your own terms, then I hope you'll subscribe. Not just for me, but for every story like yours that deserves to be heard, and every quiet voice still waiting to be felt. You didn't disappear. You just stopped asking for permission to exist.